Imagination, mostly. I think it's because there's several covens still operating in the Cotswolds. They dance around the all together, I think. It came because there's a lot of incomers in the Cotswolds, you see. But underneath, I always think geography shapes people. There can be a sinister side to some of the villages that are not in the tourist route, you know, down the folds of the wolds, enclosed. And something almost seems to come off the ground. I went to the church once when I used to go, and they were singing The Lord of the Dance. And I felt, this is wrong, this is wrong, because it was an old Shaker hymn, and the Shakers took the folk hymns out to the States with them, and the Lord of the Dance was the devil. And therefore, there was almost something sacrilegious in the church that was coming off the walls. It was a funny feeling. So you let your imagination run riot, and then you see this tree where nothing grows and the black twisted branches creaking in the wind. And it's just dying for a body to be hung on it now, isn't it? Well, it happened to me when I first moved down because, you know, in winter when the mist comes down and you feel there's a perfect splendid party on the other side of the hill to which you haven't been invited, you begin to feel cut off. And then suddenly you start going back to London and you don't fit anymore. And you're just glad to get back again. They have a dream of, it's the incomers try and maintain the village life. And I remember in one book someone said it got so far that soon they'll be getting a little woman round to twitch the curtains for them. You know, like they have a perfect treasure to do the cleaning. You need someone to twitch the curtains and report. Not that much. Still a bit prickly. Still slightly emotionally retarded, as all romantics are, because nothing is really ever going to meet the expectation of the romantic, I think. Well, watch this space. I don't really know. I suppose at the back of my mind, I never liked when they got married. In Niall Marsh, when she married, who is it? Who's a detective? Not Elaine? Yes, Alan. Marries the artist. It was no longer a cliffhanger, you see. Dorothy Sayers wound it up very nicely with Fussman's Honeymoon, which is a terrific book. But I like this sort of romance. Reporting, I suppose, or journalism. Running a firm of some kind, perhaps a cosmetic firm, or anything in the fashion business, maybe ready to wear, I don't know. Anything that involves a rather pushy, dominating woman. I couldn't read Dorothy Sayers again. I could recite them to you. Agatha Christie, when I had a hip replacement in Paris and I got morphine poisoning and everyone's saying you must exercise and I couldn't get off the sofa, I sent my sister up to the Rue de Rivoli to W. Smith's and a whole pile of Agatha Christie that I hadn't read in years as comfort food. They all have a nice story, you know, beginning, middle and end, and they're quite clever. And I enjoy her struggles of trying to get rid of Poirot that she brings out in her detective, Mrs. Oliver, who writes about a Finn and wants rid of him, but her publishers won't let her. I'm currently reading, well, I just finished a Patricia Wentworth. She thought up Miss Silver 8 years before Agatha Christie produced Miss Marple. I like them because, particularly between the wars one, they're so old-fashioned, it's a lost world, you know. Mm-hmm. They're very escapist, they're very readable. But someone recommended a book by a Henry Robertson To Be Continued is a sort of Scottish one. The Patricia Wentworths, they're quite often the country house with the setting of the village, and God bless the squire and his relations and keep them in the proper stations, which is an old hymn. And there's the pecking order. The women are usually in need of money because after the Great War, there weren't the men around. And they still had it in families. Any money went to the men that were left, and nothing ever went to the women who had to find jobs in dress shops or mannequins or companions or any genteel job. And it's another world because one heroine's wandering in the fog and is rescued by this young man who says, I can put you up for the night, don't worry, I've got a housekeeper. And she goes to his apartment and the housekeeper says, I've run a nice hot bath for you, miss, and do leave the water for the master when you're finished. And it seems peculiar now that you should leave dirty water in the bath, but it came off the back burner on the fire and it was rationed, yeah. I do a 3-book contract. When the contract is finished, my agent says I want 3 more. And so I send in 3 more. And then sometimes I take one out of the file later on and think, what on earth was I thinking when I wrote this? Sometimes I beg to change it if I can't remember where I was going with it, if I think it's going to be flat or difficult. But usually I keep to it. The idea of the covens, it was just this idea of there is sometimes these Cotswold villages something underneath that comes from the older days of inbreeding and religion and the old sort of black magic which they were apt to rely on. It's still there somehow, you know, with a sort of veneer on top.